Hello everybody, my name is Stacia and I'm just a girl on the internet that likes to talk about movies. And this week is going to be another one of my favorite Best Picture Oscar winners. It's going to be the 1967 film In the Heat of the Night. And this movie is basically about a black Philadelphia police detective who is mistakenly a suspect for a local murder while passing through a racially charged Mississippi town. And after being cleared, he is reluctantly asked by the police chief to help investigate the case since he's a detective and they don't have a lot of experience in murder investigations. This is based on a 1965 novel called In the Heat of the Night that was written by John Ball. And the director of this movie is Norman Jewison. Besides this movie, he directed Moonstruck, Jesus Christ Superstar, The Hurricane, A Soldier's Story, and Justice for All. A lot of very well-known movies. And this is one that is considered a trilogy of his. It's In the Heat of the Night, A Soldier's Story, and The Hurricane are considered sort of a trilogy of his that he directed. This movie stars Sidney Poitier as Detective Virgil Tibbs, Rod Steiger as Chief Bill Gillespie, Warren Oates as Officer Sam Woods, and Lee Grant as Mrs. Colbert. Along with several other people who are great in this movie, the acting is top-notch in this movie. And speaking of Sidney Poitier, 1967 was quite a year for him at the movies. He starred in the Heat of the Night, To Sir with Love, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Although, in the grand scheme of things, some very well-known, brilliant acting, and Sidney Poitier himself is an Oscar winner for Best Actor for Lilies of the Field, but was nominated for none of the movies, his big hit movies that came out in 1967. And In the Heat of the Night has quite a theme song. It is sung by Ray Charles, and the music is by music legend Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones actually did all of the music for this movie. And yes, this film is a murder mystery of sorts, but the real focus on this film, of course, is race relations. This black detective coming up from the north, he makes more money than almost anybody in this town. And just because he is black, he is accused of the murder. He's black, going through town, he must be the murderer, because that stuff doesn't happen in our town. But even though set in Sparta, Mississippi, this movie was actually made in the town of Sparta, Illinois. Change any of the signs of the town. I think in the book the town was called something different and they just changed it to Sparta, Mississippi in this movie. So they didn't have to change any signs in the town. It saves on production. And they filmed it up north for the safety of especially Sidney Poitier. They only filmed one scene really in the south. It was where it depicted a cotton field, and that really doesn't exist up north. And so they couldn't, replicate that really. So they did film for a very short time in the south. They actually had to cut the production short at that point because threats to Sidney Poitier's life. And this movie also threatened to not be shown in the South at all. Norman Jewison had to justify to the movie studio that this movie could still make them a profit if it was never shown in the South. And there is a shocking scene in this movie because it involves a black man slapping a white man. Detective Tibbs slaps Endicott, one of the upper class Southern gentlemen in the movie, and that scene almost didn't make it in the movie. And it was Sidney Poitier himself that suggested that Tibbs slaps Endicott back in the movie. Poitier stated that I said, "I'll tell you what, I'll make this movie for you if you give me your absolute guarantee when he slaps me, I can slap him right back and you guarantee that it'll play in every version of this movie. I try not to do things that are against nature. And he's like, I'm sure in my nature that if somebody slapped me like that, I slap them right back. Also, famous scene in this movie is when he's asked, what do they call you up north, boy? He says, they call me Mr. Tibbs. It is one of the best moments in movie history. And like I stated before, this movie's score was composed, arranged, and conducted by Quincy Jones himself. There was a soundtrack album released in 1967, title song, like I said, performed by Ray Charles, composed by Quincy Jones, and the lyrics, and most of the lyrics in the movie were written by Ellen and Marilyn Bergman. But the title track was released as a single on ABC Records and reached number 33 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 21 on the Hot Rhythm and Blues singles charts. And the soundtrack denotes that underlying sense of fury in this movie, beautifully played by Sidney Poitier. And the interactions between Rod Steiger's character and Sidney Poitier's character are some of the best acting that you will see. It's two people that don't see eye to eye, but come to an understanding with each other. It comes to an understanding because the white sheriff realizes he really needs this black detective, and they come to an understanding, if not a very tenuous friendship almost in the movie. And there is an underlying heat and sweatiness that is present in the South. It takes place in the summer, even though it was shot during the fall in Illinois, but they do a good job of still conveying that sense of heat and pressure coming down on everything in the South. It brings sort of an uneasiness to this movie, which really sets it apart from some of the era's movies that deal with the same sort of subjects. It has that underlying rage. They let the black people in this movie for 1967 show that rage that lies underneath of trying to keep everything together, facing these odds. And it doesn't shy away of also showing the white people as overtly racist, which I think is very important. It doesn't have a white savior complex either. If anything, Sidney Poitier's character is the savior of this movie. And at the time, this movie was released with a lot of critical acclaim. It was on several top 10 lists. It was listed as the best movie of the year. 1967 was quite a year for movies also. Several classic movies of all times were released that year. Akira Kurosawa, the famed Japanese director, lists this also as one of his favorite movies. And In the Heat of the Night was made for $2 million and ends up making over $24 million at the box office, which was a huge hit, even though a lot of theaters in the South refused to show it. So it still went on to become a hit movie. In 2002, the film was selected for preservation by the U.S. National Film Registry of the Library of Congress for its cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. And besides this movie dealing with race, especially race in the South, race in the time of the late 60s also, this movie also touches on topics like statutory rape and abortion. Let me tell you, 1967 was quite a year in movies. This is the year that Bonnie and Clyde came out, The Graduate came out, Cool Hand Luke came out, plus the 3 Sidney Poitier movies that I've already mentioned in this. This was the year of The Dirty Dozen. This is the year that Audrey Hepburn took her turn into Wait Until Dark. This is also, besides those type of movies, this is the year of Camelot and Dr. Dolittle, Taming of the Shrew. It is a time of upheaval in Hollywood between New Hollywood and Old Hollywood. And the films depicted in the Oscar race that year are also quite telling of that time in Hollywood history. Besides all of these different movies coming out, converging, where you had the Bonnie and Clydes and the graduates of it all. You had these classic style musicals like Camelot and Dr. Dolittle clashing with things like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and In the Heat of the Night. It was the start of the Hollywood revolution that would pick up during the 70s. In the Heat of the Night would be nominated for 7 Oscars and goes on to win 5 of them, including Best Picture. And I think the biggest mistake in the Oscar nominees this year is that Sidney Poitier wasn't nominated for any of the movies he was in, even though 2 of his movies were nominated for Best Picture. In the Best Picture race, In the Heat of the Night wins, but also nominated that year for Best Picture are Bonnie and Clyde, Dr. Dolittle, The Graduate, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Showing right there the confluence of old Hollywood and new Hollywood. And the people who were nominated for Best Actor includes Rod Steiger from In the Heat of the Night. He does win the award, but including in there is Warren Beatty for Bonnie and Clyde, Dustin Hoffman for The Graduate, Paul Newman for Cool Hand Luke, and Spencer Tracy for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. There's not really a bad performance in there. Personally, I would have probably replaced Spencer Tracy's nomination with Sidney Poitier being nominated. And in the Best Director race, this is one of those years where Best Director and Best Picture don't line up. Best Director that year was won by Mike Nichols for directing The Graduate, which is great. The Graduate is one of my favorite films. But Norman Jewison was nominated for In the Heat of the Night. One of the other categories that it wins that night is Best Editing. Hal Ashby is who edited In the Heat of the Night. Famed director, mostly, Hal Ashby. He started as an editor and won for this movie. And just so you know, the Oscars that year was also the year that Alfred Hitchcock was presented his Irving Thalberg Memorial Award, after he never won a directing Academy Award himself. In the Heat of the Night was not nominated for its iconic score, although Quincy Jones was nominated that night for In Cold Blood, which he also scored. He didn't win. In the Heat of the Night was also nominated for Best Sound that year. It won Best Sound. It was also nominated for Sound Effects. It was one of the 2 nominees that night. The winner was the other nominee, The Dirty Dozen. And then it was also nominated and won for writing screenplay based on material from another medium, or what we call it now, Best Adapted Screenplay. One of the awards it wasn't nominated is Best Cinematography, and I wanted to talk about that for a second because this is the first year actually where it was a major Hollywood film that was shot in color, and it was lit with proper consideration for Sidney Poitier's skin color. Oftentimes when you have Black performers in film, and this still happens today, the lighting is off because they're not properly lighting the Black actors in this movie. And Haskell Wexler took great care in making sure Sidney Poitier was properly lit during this movie. You can see his skin pops. You don't have a lot of what happens is the lighting produces too much glare on the darker skin of actors, and that doesn't really happen in this movie. He is able to light a Black man and a white man, or white actors and Black actors in the same scene, and make all of them look good, which I'm glad, especially in that time, that they took care to do that, which, like I said, it still happens in a lot of movies to this day where actors of color are not shot properly in a movie. And Sidney Poitier loved this movie. He often said that this was the best movie that he ever did. And that's saying something, because if you look at Sidney Poitier's film history, there are some absolute brilliant films in that. Some of the best movies of all time. This movie did produce 2 sequels that did well at the box office. They weren't runaway hits or critical, really, outstanding moments in film history. They're not bad movies. One of the 2 sequels is They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, that came out in 1970. And in 1971, the other sequel called The Organization. And in the 80s and 90s, of course, there was the TV show In the Heat of the Night, where Howard Rollins played Detective Tibbs and Carol O'Connor played Sheriff Gillespie. So with the Oscars coming up at the beginning of next month, you can't really go wrong with watching 1967 Best Picture winner In the Heat of the Night. If you've never seen it, it is a great movie to watch, especially if you want to get into older movies. It's got murder mystery, it's got tension, it's got suspense from not just the murder mystery. The acting is superb in it. It looks great for a 1960 film, sort of Technicolor in all the great ways. But you can't go wrong with watching any of the Best Picture nominees from 1967 either. So thank you for joining me this week. I hope you check out, if you've never seen In the Heat of the Night, I hope you give it a chance and check it out. If you have seen In the Heat of the Night, let me know what you think about the movie, especially if you remember the TV series. Tell me your thoughts of the TV series versus the movie, or memories that you have in the heat of the night. I love when you guys share your memories of watching these movies just like I do. I like the conversation there. But if you like movies like I do, consider subscribing to the channel. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of June this year. Hopefully I can do it. But I appreciate your support. You can also support me not only by subscribing, but the comments do help, and it helps when you give me a thumbs up or share this with other people. If you have friends that like movies like I do, we're building a little community here. I try to respond to everybody's comments in the comment section, and you can comment whether you like the movie or not. You could totally disagree with me, or if you ever have corrections for me, I take it all. I believe we can all have a respectful conversation about movies, whether we agree or not. But thank you for joining me again. My name is Stacia. I love you all. See you next time. Bye.